All right, we are live, and this is Dr. Rob Keltz, and I'm really, really excited to share with the special guest today, Laura Spath. And Laura is a full-time working mom who's lost 120 pounds on a meat-only carnivore diet. For the last 4 years, she has focused on maintenance and healing her relationship with food. She shares a realistic approach to carnivore with an emphasis on long-term sustainability in her and your and all of our busy lives. She shares about carnivore lifestyle daily on Instagram, on YouTube, and she also is a co-host the Cutting Against the Grain podcast with Nutrition with Judy Cho. And so, welcome, Laura. So glad you could join us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, again, we've just enjoyed so much of what you've been doing. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first heard about carnivore and you got into this crazy carnivore space.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was all very unintentional. I call myself an accidental influencer. I had no intention of sharing things online or, any of this kind of stuff. I'm somebody who struggled with their weight. I had, pretty much yo-yo dieted my whole life ever since, puberty when I gained my first 20 pounds and was always trying like whatever it was, the current diet that everybody was doing. At one point I watched the Forks Over Knives movie when that first came out and went vegan because that's what you're supposed to do. And even like growing up, I grew up in the church. And so there was like a Bible study weight loss group where you were supposed to, like let God be your intuition on if you were supposed to eat or not. And so like, just really, I have gone through the gamut of whatever you needed to do to lose weight. And I kind of topped out at my highest weight. I had like really gone up and down. I'd lost, 80, 90 pounds before, but then had always gained it all back again. And so I tried to start another diet. I was done having kids. My son was almost 2 and I weighed more than I did when I went into labor with him, which was kind of a wake up call for me. My husband was very severely diabetic. And so we tried keto. Keto was the new thing. So we figured like, we knew we couldn't do carbs because I was pre-diabetic and my husband was type 2 diabetic. So we knew we had to cut out the carbs and sugar and just started keto because that's kind of what the fad was in 2018, what everybody was doing. And then I think this time we just were really determined to figure out not only about how to lose weight, but also how to fix our health and fix the diabetes and fix, the insulin resistance and some of the other medical issues that we had. And through that, we started just doing a lot more research. And we heard about carnivore through Jordan Peterson and then Sean Baker and kind of just found the carnivore world and really opened our eyes up to how much more satisfying it was to eat a lot of meat, how helpful it was to eliminate a lot of the processed keto foods, the keto treats, how much my digestion improved, and really just kind of launched into this carnivore world through a lot of the research and understanding that we were doing. And then also just for the first time, it was sustainable for me. And I wasn't constantly struggling with cheat days and I wasn't constantly falling off the wagon. And it really has been this approach that's allowed me to maintain a healthy weight, enjoy the food that I'm eating, be healthy, and then just kind of accidentally started sharing about that online.
Yeah. And how did you accidentally, you said accidental influencer, because obviously you've inspired so many people in sharing your I'm going to use the word simple methodology,
Yeah.
which ultimately, because you mentioned other diets and yo-yoing and these challenges and struggles, but this is sort of, let's see, keto is complicated and carnivore is simple. Would you agree? And
I think for a lot of people, it can be. Obviously, there's exceptions in people who are very, very sick and struggling with other root cause things. But what I'm finding is that the majority of people are just overweight and don't know how to manage that. They're trying to force themselves to be moderators, or they're trying to force themselves to use portion control and things like that just are so difficult for those of us that have this like insatiable hunger at times. And so for me, it has been very simple, not only with the foods that I've eat, but with the satiety that I get, it's so much easier the frequency. I don't have to eat as often. Like there's just so much that's simple about it. And that's been the reason why I've been able to maintain it this whole time, I think. And then I had just posted, like I lost 100 pounds and I saw it online 4 years ago, like 2 days ago. So this week has been exactly 4 years since I hit 100 pounds weight loss.
Wow.
And I posted a picture just on my personal Facebook and my personal Instagram, just to friends and family to say, I lost 100 pounds. Okay, at this time I'm determined. I'm not going to gain it back again. And that was that. And then between now and January, I lost another 20 pounds. And so January was World Carnivore Month. It had been, a full year of doing carnivore. I had lost 120 pounds by that point. And I posted a picture just to say, again, I hit 120 pounds of weight loss. It's World Carnivore Month. And then I had tagged a couple of people who had inspired me along the way. So I just said, thank you to, Sean Baker and I think Dr. Barry and a couple other people. I used the hashtag carnivore diet, which was, this was in early 2019. So it wasn't a huge thing yet. And I posted it and went to bed. And I had maybe 60 friends and family and my cousins on my Instagram account. And I woke up the next day and I had 1,000 followers. And,
Wow.
Sean Baker had reposted it. Brian Sanders from Food Lies had reposted that picture. And I think that was kind of what started it. And then people started asking questions like, how did you lose weight? What are you eating? What are you doing? And I just kind of started answering questions. And then I really haven't stopped since then.
And it sounds like you're really enjoying this amazing followers. And we're going to be taking some questions here also because we are live, and I know there are many of your followers here today. Tell us a little bit about, this idea of relationships with food and how we sort of have these addictions and bad relationships with food. And how do you think carnivore has sort of shifted and been different than all the other diets?
I think people end up strict carnivore, even more so to say long-term strict carnivore, for two reasons. One is they're very, very sick people and they have a lot of root cause health issues that need to be addressed. And they just can't really tolerate any other foods from a physical standpoint other than meat, because of some type of other health autoimmune conditions, what that might be. And I also think there's a group of us who end up on carnivore because I can't handle having one bite of peanut butter because I'll eat the whole jar. And I can't handle having, one bite of a cupcake and then not eat 3 or 7 or the whole dozen, like whatever's available to me. And so I do think that there's this level of, people who aren't able to just have a small bite of something. And we tend to end up strict carnivore. And I realize for me, it is so much easier to have none of a piece of a cookie than it is to have a bite of a cookie. And when I stopped trying to force myself to have those small amounts, it actually got a lot easier for me. And it doesn't mean I never want those things or I never struggle with cravings, or I don't think I'll ever be one of those people who can look at a donut and think like, that's poison. That's terrible. Like, no, it looks like a donut and I bet it's amazing. But I also know that one donut would be a crazy spiral for me where I would eat many and then I'd be looking for food and it would just be this constant emotional and physical struggle. And so I do think there's an element of people who try the carnivore diet, they heal some things, they find out what foods affect them or not, and then they go back to having some sort of balance. And that's totally fine as well. They use carnivore as an elimination diet. But those of us who end up carnivore long-term do have a history of disordered eating, whether that's restrictive or overeating, or just this obsession with food. And we need something like carnivore, not only to keep us healthy, like that's the benefit. This has been the reward through all this, is that I am able to use this, diet to not only keep me healthy, but then also to just be foods that I'm not constantly spinning out of control with.
But I guess the question also is the difference when you were just doing whatever the keto was or whatever those other diets are, the difference in carnivore, do you feel satisfied where before maybe you didn't feel satisfied? And so the struggle was more dissatisfaction and the weight keeps on going up and down before, but now it just stays off.
I wouldn't say that so I agree with you to some extent. I do think that I do feel much more physically satisfied. The food is much more enjoyable. I'm not living on salads and chicken breast and steamed vegetables and rice. And I get to eat steaks every day. Today I had some Parmesan pork chops and some really amazing grilled shrimp and a filet full of, topped with butter and salt. And that's an incredible meal. that I walked away from that meal feeling incredibly satisfied, and I enjoyed what I was doing. And so because of something like that, I'm not feeling restricted daily. I'm not feeling kind of tortured with what I'm eating. But I still can overeat on carnivore. If I'm not careful about implementing some intermittent fasting, like to me, it's not this natural thing of like, well, now I won't want food again until I'm absolutely physically hungry. I don't need to be hungry to want to eat. And even on carnivore foods, I have been open about struggling with kind of the mindless overeating, what I call carnivore junk foods at times, which is the slices of cheese and the pepperonis and the pork rinds and the jerkies and kind of all of those things. If I'm not careful, that could be something that would come back in, and I could still gain weight just being strict carnivore. And so as long as I kind of call it like eating more meals, eating more, individual ingredient meals and less snacks, even if you're kind of combining all of those snacks into a meal, it still isn't as satisfying to me as just having like individual meats.
And so in some way, it sounds like there's still a satisfaction that's greater, and there's less of that sort of drive to overeat in some way. I don't know. I find it sometimes that the meat mostly or only, you're so much more satisfied and you don't feel this urge that you have to continuously eat more. And it seems easier to stay this path, do you think? Is it easier to stay on carnivore than it is to stay on whatever that watcher of calories?
Weight Watchers or all the other things. Yeah. I mean, absolutely, because the food is very satisfying. But I am careful not to try to say to people that it's this intuitiveness of just eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full, and then whoop, fixed, I'm perfect. It's, I'm healed. Because I don't feel that. I don't feel that immense freedom. I still have to be careful not to snack when I'm not hungry. But from a physical hunger standpoint, absolutely. I am not physically hungry outside of my 1 or 2 meals that I have a day. It's extremely satisfying. And but I have to just be careful. This has been the biggest part of this for me in keeping this off, is realizing the difference between physical hunger and then just emotional hunger or boredom or wanting to eat even though you're not hungry. And so there's not a cure for that. But I think in this regards of just not feeling physically hungry all the time, as if you're drastically cutting calories or, worrying about eating salads and chicken breast, there's a much greater physical satisfaction for that, for sure.
I've always thought that plants are basically a drug, and those drugs, we feel so good on them, but then you feel so bad, and then you need them again to make you feel good again, because there's a lot of opiates within most plants that are very small amounts that they hit our happy zone. And then we think it's a low sugar, but it's not. It's a low opiate drug, essentially. That's the thing that makes us feel that. I think that's I play with that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about physical, not just the physical look, but the physical feel and the emotional feel. And there's a couple of questions on emotions, and we maybe add in that in hormones.
Yeah, absolutely. So physically, I mean, I had a knee surgery when I was at my heaviest weight because I had a torn meniscus. And that's something that happens when you are severely obese or you are a football player. Like, it's just, I certainly wasn't active and wasn't playing football in any regards. It's just my body was having a hard time. My knees were having a hard time carrying around the weight that I had. I had a back surgery partly due to car accidents. It injured it, but then also just to some degenerative discs in my lower back when I was 19 years old. I had my first back surgery. And so, I've had, for the most part, no back issues at all over the last 4 years. Actually, very recently, I just went to go see a chiropractor and I got a new chair that I work from home. So I got a new chair, and that's actually been, I think I just had a really terrible chair and tweaked my back. But in the last 4 years, I've had really almost no back issues. And that's been a tremendous healing. When all of my 20s, I was experiencing some kind of pretty terrible back pain. A lot of just energy differences. I've always been somebody that needed a lot of sleep and could sleep 10 hours a night and then still take a nap. And so really just not feeling this extreme fatigue all the time like I used to feel. I feel so much better now. And I think that's a huge part of it. And just you don't realize how bad you feel. And this is where, people start really getting sold on carnivore. They'll try carnivore for a month and maybe they'll lose that first 10 pounds of water weight, and then they keep it up for a while. And then something happens, their birthday comes around or they have a vacation and they go off carnivore. And all of these symptoms that they didn't realize they had were coming back. The knee pain and the headaches and the brain fog and the, whatever it is, muscle cramps, and all these things come flooding back. And they're like, wow, I didn't realize how good I actually felt. And this is, or like how terrible I really felt before. And so I think that's always the big motivator for people to get back to carnivore or stick to it, because they just feel so much better physically.
Tell us a little bit about your full-time working and your
Yes.
mom and obviously a wife, and you're running a family. Tell us a little bit about how the kids have transitioned with this, and a little bit maybe how your husband's transition in all of this, and how he's doing with his type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work a regular corporate normal Monday to Friday job. And then we actually started transitioning our kids. They're not strict carnivore. And I think that's kind of the balance that we've learned to strike. And I'm hoping that helps them to prevent kind of any food obsession issues that I have. If they realize that they need 3 meals a day that are a lot of good protein, they know that they need, and that's the main thing that they need to keep them strong. And we talk a lot about how mom and dad used to eat too much sugar for way too long, and it made us really sick. And so we try not to focus on things like weight or, even just saying that this is a bad food and you can never have it. We really haven't gone that route. Mainly because I was restricted from a lot of things growing up. And so then the minute I moved out on my own and went to college, I was like, oh my God, fast food, Taco Bell, eating it every day. And that was just this part of that obsession. And so we really try to focus on something like sugar is not good if you eat it too much and way too often. And so they don't have snacks and they don't have food frequently, but if they go to a birthday party, they might have the treats that come with the birthday party. And then after that, we go home and say, okay, we had some treats yesterday. Like, let's take a break for a couple of days and make sure we're not having too much sugar. And then we also say, like, mom and dad ate enough sugar for our whole life already. Like, I don't need any more. I already had enough. So you got to make sure you don't have too much now if you want to have a little bit occasionally. So we try to focus on it like that. But they eat 3 meals a day. We really steer clear for the most part of like snacks, and especially like carby snacks or any kind of things, because really they aren't going to want to eat a bunch of good meat for lunch and for dinner if they're having snacks that are sugar or something right before that. And then my husband's amazing. He lost 100 pounds also. He completely reversed his type 2 diabetes. He got off his high blood pressure medication. He used to have sleep apnea, no longer, within 6 months, no longer needed any of those medications or any of that machine to sleep with. My mom also is in her 60s and she got off of all her diabetes medication. She has Hashimoto's. And so she's really stabilized and reduced her thyroid medication. But it truly kind of the carnivore plus fasting has been this really life-changing thing for our whole family. And then we've seen that ripple effect kind of go through uncles and cousins and friends and family and coworkers. And it's really even just without social media, we've seen it kind of ripple through our family.
Have you noticed any other nutritional or dietary habits have such an impact as carnivore has?
Definitely not for us. And I feel like I've tried them all. Absolutely. I also think not only is it about changing the foods, but it's about changing kind of some of our habits around those foods. It's been a big push for us to not eat while we watch TV. So like my kids will eat and they eat at the table. So they know that like this is a meal time and this is when you eat. And so we're trying to not only with ourselves break that mindless eating habit, but then also with them not create this, if they're homeschooled. And so I don't want them to be like sitting there and eating and doing schoolwork, because it just creates this mindless eating mentality, or eating and watching television or kind of those things. But carnivore definitely has been the part that physically satisfies and really helps not need to do that.
I've always noticed that if you have a big bowl of popcorn or whatever those chips and things are, it's just continuous. But if you have a few pieces of cut steak or even some salami, a few pieces of cheese, if you're there as a snack, that it's easy just to have a little bit and be done with it. Have you noticed something like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think even in the beginning, I would just munch on a couple pieces of coarse salt. Like if my brain is really wanting to eat and I know I'm not physically hungry, but like I'm still struggling with this, a mental reason to want a snack, or you don't know what to do with your hands, just taking like some really crunchy salt and just like crunching on a few pieces of those, it kind of almost gives your brain that salty chip taste that it's looking for, or it almost just helps the hand to mouth function that you're looking for when you know you're not really hungry.
And you mentioned a significant weight loss. Have you noticed anything in hormonal sort of effects, mood swings, and things like that in your day-to-day function?
I mean, my husband will probably tell you I'm a lot less cranky or have less mood swings than he mentioned. I also think too, like when you are looking to lose weight, I got to a point, even with carnivore, was really healthy. My hormones were in a good place. I had lost 100 pounds. And then I thought like, I could lose more. Like I just need to keep going. Like I didn't know how to stop this kind of intense weight loss mode and almost pull back to maintenance mode. I didn't really know what that looked like. And so I did get a little too thin at first. I think that 120 pounds was almost a little too thin. I really didn't exercise for the majority of my weight loss, but right near the end, I started adding in exercises. And along with being an obsessive person, I kind of over-exercised a little too much. I started like increasing my fasting, like all of these things that are good. I think there are so many good elements. Some exercise can be good. Fasting can be good. Carnivore all of these things can be good. It doesn't mean that more is always better. And so in the height of like me trying to optimize things, I did more of everything and I got too thin and my hormones at that point, even doing all the right things, but I was doing too much of all of it. My hormones tanked. I stopped having a cycle for like 6 months. And all of this is still like in the vein of being positive and like trying to follow all the rules. And so at that point, I had to kind of like chill out a little bit. I had to stop doing more of all those things. I had to pull back a little bit. I still do fasting, but I had to kind of like lower the frequency of all those things. And now everything is like very consistent, really great hormones. I have no issues with any of that kind of stuff. So for me, this is why I've adapted to this like very simple, realistic, like how do I live my normal life and not have to have like what I eat, exercise, grounding, light, like all of these things can be good things. But when it's the only thing that you can obsess about to optimize, I think that's where we get a little too crazy with, better, more is not always better.
Mm-hmm.
It almost can push you to the bad side of things. And so that doesn't really answer your hormone question, but what I mean is I'm in a really amazing place for the last 4 years. And I can tell with my hair and my moods and, all these great things with my energy. But I think sometimes we push that because we think this is a good thing. So let's do more of it. And that's not always true.
So what would you say is Laura's basic day-to-day simplicity? You have sort of a handful of simple directives, recommendations.
Yeah, I think, especially if people are starting out, I think they just need to eat meat and eggs and use cheese as a condiment, right? I could very easily overeat cheese, but if I focus on cheese as like a little dessert or as a condiment, I think that's great. I think I personally tend to eat 2 meals a day, sometimes one. Occasionally, I try not to do 1 meal a day more than about twice a week because I personally will just start under eating because carnivore is so satisfying. It's very easy for me based on my schedule and satiety to just eat 1 meal a day for lunch. And I used to be able to do that when I first transitioned to carnivore. I could eat this massive volume of food in one sitting. It was plenty of food for me for the day. And then over time, I just really can't eat that much anymore. And so that was another part of the kind of where things went wrong was I was under eating in addition to all those other things. And so I was really trying to force 1 meal a day for longer than was helpful. So now I almost have to like check in with myself and say, are you eating enough? If I do 1 meal a day, once or twice a week, that's fine. But if I'm doing it every day, then that likely will lead to me under eating. So really that's kind of the main thing is just, I try to just live a normal life. I play with my kids in the evenings. I work my job during the day. I have lunch. And I mean, like, it's really just something that I don't want what I eat every day to be the thing that it's just like I happen to eat meat and I only eat meat. It's not like what I think and talk about all day long, other than the fact that I just so happen to do all this stuff on the internet. So like, that's almost where I get a little more transparent about it. But I'm just trying to like go back to living a normal life with a person who just happens to eat nothing but meat.
Do you have any particular ratios of fat, protein? Do you try to sort of work in more of one or the other, or you just sort of eat the particular meats? What are your cuts of meats and things like that?
Yeah, I've definitely gone through different phases. I have never really said I'm going to hit these macros as far as like fat to protein ratio. I've tracked it sometimes just simply because people are always really curious. If I were to track like what I naturally eat, I would say it's probably around like the 70, 75%, maybe probably 60. I would say 65 to 75% fat to protein. I think that it's really important that people are getting enough protein. That was another part of when I went keto actually and lost some weight at first, all my hair started falling out because I was under eating protein. I was so concerned about the keto macros and like hitting my enough fat for keto that I was really eating like 50 grams of protein a day. And that was just so little. And I really started having some health issues because of that. So, I just try to make sure I'm getting enough protein in. I shoot for like 1 gram per 1 pound of lean body mass. So I try to shoot for at least 120, 130 grams of protein a day. And then really beyond that, it's just kind of what sounds good. I spent like at least a year eating nothing but ribeyes. This was back in 2019 before prices went really high. I just ate ribeyes all day long. And now I have one occasionally as a treat, but I eat a lot of chicken wings. I eat a lot of pork. Pork really helps balance the budget, and so does the chicken. We do a lot of chicken thighs. I do a lot of like a skirt steak or flat meat, kind of fajita style. I do a lot of shrimp. So I really don't pay any attention to the macro ratios. And if anything, some days I might just eat a bunch of chicken and some shrimp and a fillet and add some butter to things. But then the next day I'm like, dang, I really want something fatty. I want some bacon. Because I think it's just a natural tendency for your body to want leaner on some days and then you want fattier on some days. And so I really have never been consistent as far as macros go.
And tell us a little about using any supplements. Do you add any supplements to your nutrition? I did listen to you on you don't use much organ meats or at all.
Never. No. I've never once. No, I have no intentions of doing it either. No.
But you're not adding supplements and you're not using organ meats and you feel great.
Yeah, I feel great. I don't do any organ supplements at all. My husband, somebody sent us like a free jar of the organ blend of something. And my husband took a whole jar and was like, I don't feel any different. I'm not doing this. And so we just have neither one of us have ever done that and have felt completely fine from that. I don't take any supplements daily. I would say sometimes I'll use a magnesium spray if I need to. If I'm fasting, I might get a leg or foot cramp or something. And so I'll use a magnesium spray. I do electrolytes if I'm fasting. I've been using the Element packets and just the sodium, potassium, magnesium, but that's really just it's more just a supplement for like electrolytes. I travel so much. It does help with my sleep and things like that, but I don't take any other pills regularly or supplements of any kind.
So you travel a lot. So I was also watching a little bit about your packing for travel and food. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I travel for my job and I try to bring some of my own food. So a lot of times if I'm traveling by myself, I might be able to decide what restaurant I go to. But there are times when I just end up at whatever restaurant the group that I'm with ends up at, and I don't really have a lot of choice in the matter. And so I always try to travel with some of my own food. I'll make jerkies or I'll bring some meat sticks or carnivore snacks or something to like supplement if I felt like I couldn't get enough in a meal of some kind. I like to have those things on hand, and I always travel with all my favorite salts. So like, as far as supplementing goes, I love salts and I travel with them and I really heavily salt my meals, which I do consider like that's almost like a supplement itself. And so I take those with me, take my little container of butter with me everywhere.
Any particular butter you like?
I really love just like a whipped butter. And so my favorite brand is being rebranded and you can't find it in stores everywhere. And so I'm hoping that they bring it back eventually. But I've been using a butter from Walmart. It has like a deer on the front. I don't know. It's like a whipped salted butter. But it tastes so light and airy that I can like dip jerkies or, meat chips in it. And it just ends up being like a really light flavor.
And you do some jerky or a beef stick or a meat stick? What brand do you like?
Paleo Valley has some beef and turkey sticks. So rather than being like it's like a lot of the stuff that you're going to find is like a blend of porks and other kinds of meats and things. But Paleo Valley has 100% beef stick and turkey, and they actually like ferment them. So they're not using a lot of oils and things for the preservation. They kind of go through this fermentation process. So it tastes like a normal beef stick to me, which is what matters. Like food has to taste good for me. But thankfully it's just a little easier on your gut and that kind of stuff.
So I'm assuming your gut issues are gone. Your weight is stable. You're happy where you're at. Would you say this is sustainable for life?
So I always say that, like, who knows? I think it's sustainable for life, but whether or not I don't know if it's strong enough to do that or can do that. Like, I still struggle with, I still have to take things one day at a time. So if you would have said to me 4 years ago, like, you're going to be doing this in 4 years, I never would have believed you. And in a lot of ways, if you tell me now, like, you're still going to be doing this in 4 years, like, I don't see why not. I'm healthier than I've ever been. I'm in my late 30s and I'm healthier than I was in my early 20s. And so all of these things are going so well for me. But even just the thought of like, you have to do this forever is like overwhelming. And I start panicking. But just to say like, well, that's what I'm going to do today. And this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. And I have no plans of doing anything different. I don't see why I wouldn't do this. But to commit to that, like, it's a wonder I ever got married because I'm not very good at commitment. I'm very committed to my husband, but it is a wonder because like long-term goals are just really overwhelming for me. And so I still have this mindset. And this is what I really try to talk to people about is like, sometimes we make these like 90-day challenges or even 30-day challenges, but it's just to say like, it's one day. This is all I'm going to do today. Whatever is tempting me, whatever is craving me, it will be there tomorrow. And then tomorrow's stronger. Tomorrow's Laura. I can worry about that. But just to know that like, it's not that hard to do something for one day. And then when you kind of all of a sudden have added up all of these one days together, you realize that you've made it 4 years, the next thing that you know. And so it really, to me, just every time I was just always so big and obsessed about like the holiday special edition foods that come out around the holidays. And now it's like, they're all strung together. So you could get like the special foods all year round, depending on, what they are. But it did take me a lot of Christmases to say like, you know what, that food will be here next Christmas, it's just one Christmas. It's just one time. It'll be there next time. And then obviously over time it gets easier. But I still kind of have to focus on things on one day at a time sometimes.
Is there any particular food that you don't eat today, but you really miss?
Oh, I mean, sure, but nothing that would be good for me or that would help me feel good or that would keep me on track. There's definitely, it's all just junk. I mean, I don't want to like list them all and trigger people, but those are things that I do have to look at it like a drug. But I mean, I used to be a smoker and I just it was a lot easier for me to quit smoking than it was for me to quit food. And I still, though, the thought of a cigarette doesn't sound appealing at all. But then you watch a movie or you're watching Mad Men in this show where everybody's like smoking and they're all so cool. And you're like, ooh, I would love a cigarette. And then you smell it and you're like, okay, never mind. And so I have no interest in actually smoking again, but I also sometimes get this nostalgic feeling around that. And so especially around the holidays or you see specific foods or I'm going to my grandparents' house next weekend and I'm sure there's going to be things where it's like comfort foods I grew up with. And I really just try to remember the memories that I had of those instances. And then also just like, I can still really enjoy the time that I'm here with my family and my grandparents who are in their 90s and, enjoy this special time without having to have that food again. So I might miss them, but in the same way that you miss something that's like not good for you or a toxic relationship.
And are you finding you've lost friends or relationships over any of this? Or I find that there's a bigger gain than anything over this. Are you seeing similar?
So like my close group of friends are all people at this point that I've met through this community. Judy and I have become so close. Our family, we're spending holidays together. Our kids are close. Our husbands are friends. I've gotten so inseparable with several people and just really lifelong friendships with people that I've met through this community. And then I think it was more early on. There are people in your life who fill a role for you, or I was the hot mess friend who constantly was like falling apart and needed help, I think. And when you no longer are reaching out to say like, I failed my diet, did this, oops, I caved, oops, like when you stop being the hot mess, then you realize like you kind of get distant from that relationship. And so I think that I definitely had nothing dramatic, but just some relationships that slowly dissolved or separated over time. But the gain for me has been so much more tremendous, for people wonderful, amazing people that I've met.
And as a accidental influencer in essence, but this is the transition of healthcare today, because no longer do you go to a licensed nutritionist or need one. Although I admire and love what Judy Cho is doing, and we've interviewed and we're going to do it again. It's the whole change in healthcare and inspiring people to do something that they're not getting from standard nutritional care nor standard
Right.
medical care. How have your do you go to a doctor? How does your husband has had a doctor in the past? I mean, how has that relationship held up?
We really haven't. I'm trying to think when's the last time we went to a doctor. And my husband went to his doctor originally after about a year and got blood work done. His A1C had gone from like 11.6 down to 4.9, and he just was off all his medications. And his doctor was like, well, you probably need a statin. And he was like, okay, I'm good. Thanks. Bye. And I don't think he's been back since. I hadn't had blood work done in a couple of years and wanted to just check in more for like to share, because you get asked so much. So I hired Judy and she did it and ran my blood work and went through it. So like I haven't been to a doctor in several years either, even though we have both had blood work done, or I've had blood work done since then. So yeah, I don't even know too, like this sounds terrible, but I think if I went to a doctor or for any issues, I would just say like, run my labs and see what you see. Like I have no reason to tell them how I eat, because then they just make assumptions about that without even really, looking at any of your blood work or anything. I think they would kind of make some assumptions.
Well, my experiences in general, our labs are all based on a standard nutritional plan, standard American diet, and so the values are all off anyway.
Right.
And maybe our definition diagnosis, especially when it comes to cholesterol, because it's all a lie, most likely. And so we have to be careful about what we get when we get a blood test, because every time I get my blood drawn, which is rarely, it's high cholesterol. And I already know that that's not the best. So tell us a little bit about your social media work and I know you also have a sort of a private group that is inspiring people. Tell us a little bit about the groups you're in.
Sure. So it's been interesting because I don't have clients. I don't really feel that I don't feel like I am in a position where I can tell other people how to eat this way or do this, because there's so much context, and obviously my experience is all from me and in my life and what works for me. That's kind of all I can share, is like what works for me. And I think that everybody is so very different. What I try to do with YouTube or Instagram is really just to show people examples of like how you can live this way and live a normal life. Because most people that are out there, nutrition and health and influencer and like being healthy isn't their full-time job. And it's really easy to maybe, like we say this about actors all the time, their job for a movie is to be healthy and to have a six-pack abs and to do these things, but that's their whole job. And they have people that they've hired to do these things. And so if that's your number one focus, you can do that. But it's interesting, like if you have to live a normal life, like how can you also then do this as well? And so that's really my goal with my social, with like YouTube and Instagram. And then, I'm, to be honest, like not knowing how things would be censored sometimes in the health space and political space. And so wanting to have a place that's like outside of criticism. When I started sharing those what I order videos, the internet response was very unexpected for me. And it just makes things like YouTube and Instagram like very noisy with, I don't know if it's trolls or just like crazy people on the internet, like people who are very lonely and like to harass people on the internet. And I just don't want to do that. Like I don't have time in my life or any desire to kind of consume all of that. So I had been in Locals. It's a platform called Locals, which is a website, and then they also have an app. I'm in some other communities for like political spaces where a lot of people go to these types of platforms when they're looking for to not be censored in some way. And so it's really just a place where I can share without anybody there that's going to harass me. It's like people, you're only there if you want to be there. And it kind of does two things where like, I don't have to waste time on comments and DMs from people who really are not interested in getting better or improving themselves in any way. And they just want to criticize. Like, I don't have to deal with that now. And then also it's a really great place where people can meet other people. So like if you relate to my content, you probably are relating to something that I say and you're trying to improve yourself and you're struggling with similar things that I'm struggling with. And now you can meet other people that are kind of dealing with the same things. So I do live streams in there, and I can really answer questions like much more personal level. We can talk about context and we can kind of all encourage each other. Really, that's more what it is just trying to encourage people and then not really have to deal with kind of all the outside stuff, which is really nice.
The yik yak, I call it.
Yeah.
That's always out there. And how do you talk about the differences between keto and carnivore within your group, or just, how do you explain it to those people who are trying to sort of figure out which way do I go?
Yeah, I kind of always say like, you don't know if carnivore is going to be right for you unless you try it. And so I really, even with people outside of, in my real life, I kind of to tell somebody like you should like, hey, you should just try this. You should just give it 30 days and see how you feel. And then you can kind of lose you. I truly think that's kind of where I don't think it needs to be strict carnivore like me and be this way forever. I think, again, people who end up strict carnivores are the very sick people. Or am I still with you?
Let's see, Laura. Oh, there we go. I think it's the hurricane around the globe that's kind of affecting all the internet connection. No, it's just, and the beauty is we can do this. And where are you, by the way? Where do you live?
I'm in Phoenix.
Okay, cool. And I'm in upstate New York, Skinny Atlas, near Syracuse. And but it's just what I love the beauty of what we can do today, and we don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I missed part of that last part, but essentially, you gotta do it to know it, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that in some way carnivore is keto, but keto is sort of like it's anything,
right? It's also very specific with the macros that you're supposed to eat, and it's very, very specific in that way. And I do think actually, so one of your posts that you did recently where you talked about like what you eat and then how you mentioned a couple other foods that like weren't meat and the frequency of how often you eat those. So actually I had a bunch of people that send me that post and they were like, he's not carnivore. What is this? And so it actually inspired Judy and I to do a podcast that released today, coincidentally, on like the definition of carnivore. And it's to say, like, if you want to eat something occasionally that's not carnivore, like that's not meat, like do those things. That's totally fine. But if you're eating those things every single day, that's not carnivore anymore. And it's helpful, not that it's dogmatic, right? Like, especially in my community, there's people who eat vegetables or peppers, or some people eat fruit, or some people eat, other things. There's no judgment on that. Like you can do whatever you want. But if we don't know what is a carnivore diet, if somebody Googles what is a carnivore diet right now, you might find the Liver King, right? Like you might find a lot of crazies out there, or like the meat and fruit and like all that other world. And it's very confusing for people who are like trying to start carnivore in the first place. And so, if somebody's eating mostly meat and then has a piece of cake on their birthday, like great, you're still a carnivore. Nobody's kicking you out of the club. But if you're eating cake every single day, like, yeah, you're not on a carnivore diet anymore. And I'm not going to feel bad for saying that. So in a lot of ways, like it's just helpful for people to understand where to start. Like you were mentioning, like how do you do carnivore diet? If you say, how do I do a keto diet? It's a very clear definition online. And so I think there's just so many varieties of carnivore that in a lot of ways that's getting hard for people to know where to start.
I think if we said all meat diet,
yeah,
that's a narrower range.
Yes.
But we are human beings in a world that from time to time, some of these things, like your kids going to a birthday party, they live in a world of birthdays,
Yes.
and it's okay, and the actual harm to those things is extremely small. The harm is, as you mentioned, addiction. So if you
Yes.
have one and you can't stop, or if you happen to have an anaphylactic reaction, and there are no anaphylactic reactions to ribeye steak or meats in
Right.
general, but they're very, very common to plant material. And so it's kind of like milk and cheese product, any milk product. Some people can't tolerate it at all, and some people can tolerate it reasonably well. And so, really, is milk a carnivore meal? It really isn't.
Right.
It's not. It's steak. It's not even eggs, really. I guess if we want to be really narrow, but I think that's a good point you're making. So I can't wait to watch that and listen, because that's it. We're all learning together,
Right.
and it's a combination. I do French fries rarely. I do cookie, cake, and ice cream. My ice cream is more common, but a very, very small amount of white sugar does not have an adverse effect on most people, because when you eat meat, there are actually sugars in meat,
Right.
but it's a small amount in comparison. So it's kind of real interesting, all this stuff. But the truth is that if you're feeling good on what you're doing and you're getting to where you want to get, well, you're doing fine. And I think that's a lot of what you're saying, that there's no Gestapo out there,
Right.
or the carnivore police trying to take you down.
Right. It's not dogmatic just to say, like, I want to understand what it is, and then you could do whatever you want. Like, that's what's nice. What we try to focus on in the community is, like, if you can handle something, enjoy it and have it. You don't have to eat a certain way to kind of like be with this group of people, but it typically is just, we're the ones who can't do those things sometimes in moderation. Like we're the ones. This is what I was saying, I think, when you got cut off was, the people who end up strict carnivore are the ones who are just the sickest or can't moderate food. And so we end up here long term because kind of like this is what we can handle emotionally or physically. But anybody else who can do things otherwise, that's also why we don't feed our kids 100% strict carnivore all the time, because I don't want them. I'm trying to hopefully teach them that like they can have those things occasionally, but the frequency is what matters most, and that they can hopefully understand what it means to feel good and not having those things too often, but not kind of feel trapped in this addiction like I do.
And I do typically one meal a day, and it's just my habit, because if I do one meal a day, my caloric intake is the best for my function in life. And in some way there's a calorie, and each of us may absorb those calories and metabolize them a little bit differently depending on our liver function and our insulin levels and things like that, and mostly our gut permeability. And the majority of our damage to our gut is secondary to a high plant-based, low animal fat diet, actually. There's something called protein poisoning and rabbit starvation for people who focus on almost only protein, which is not good for us. A very low fat diet is deadly, unfortunately. But I think that each of us, some people can't tolerate milk products or certain nuts, and they have reactions very quickly. And for like myself, I tolerate milk reasonably well, but I don't drink milk. I only do cream and butter. But if I have too much of it, I'll feel it. But I keep it minimum and not, 3 times a day, and not every single day. And so tell us a little bit about now you mentioned you're not thinking long-term about nutrition, but you've been in this space now for 4 years. You're very inspiring. Your content is rock on. Where do you see sort of this carnivore social? I don't know, what's a better thing than social media? That's not the right thing. The nutritional advocate, maybe that's a good word. Nutritional advocate.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that term for sure. What's nice for me is that I'm not obligated to share anything for any reason other than just that I want to. And I've really tried to keep it that way, right? Obviously, through things like YouTube and the podcast, I can have some, a little bit of a side income from that type of stuff. But like I have a real job and I pay my bills. And like that's how I have no pressure on me to create something or sell something or do something because I got to pay my bills. And so that's what almost when I recently transitioned from one corporate job to another, I quit my job and everybody assumed I was just going to do this social media stuff full time. But like in a lot of ways, I have no interest in that because that puts too much pressure on me. I can't handle that. It takes away from any fun that I have doing it. And so now I just get to do it if I feel like it, if I'm inspired to share, if I have something like I feel like I want to say. And then other times I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of voices out here right now, and I just can't add one more to it, and I'm going to take a little bit of a break. And so it's nice to feel that balance. I think ideally, I get very passionate about, how our kids are being fed, and it's a lot of the reason. There's many reasons why our kids are not in public schools, but a big part of it is just like the food that's there, and a lot of the stuff that they would have to deal with from a nutrition standpoint. But I hope that, there's this health symposium that's happening right now in the White House and a lot of government regulations that I'm very passionate kind of about, fighting for food freedom. I'm very, not publicly politically, involved, and do a lot that I can to support just like, food freedom and making sure there's no regulations that are happening in regards to like how we can buy and source food. And I think that's definitely coming down the pipe. And I think it's going to be important for us to know where we can source meat and who we can, like what regulations are being imposed, for that standpoint.
Water. What do you drink, and how do you regulate it? What are your thoughts on water?
So probably, much to Judy's chagrin, like I just drink tap water or just drink regular water. I'll add some electrolytes to it. I've definitely been really open. It's a terrible thing. It's like my most scandalous thing that I eat or drink, but like I'll have a Diet Coke and that's not great. But, that was a big part of me kind of getting off of my nightly pint of ice cream in the beginning, was having that like half frozen Diet Coke to kind of transition me over. And it really was a bridge for me to kind of help break through some of that. So, yeah, nothing too exciting though. For the most part, I just drink water.
And the I live on a lake in Skinny Atlas. We get our water
Okay.
from the lake, but I do like Gerolsteiner sparkling water, and I don't know why. We're probably spending too much money on bottled water anyway, and we're
Right.
probably around the world it's depleting a lot of local water resources for the local inhabitants, which is kind of scary. And then we've created all this plastic and all this other crazy stuff, which
Yeah.
is been what's the most fun you're having? What's the thing that sort of you are obviously family always first, it sounds like, which is
Sure.
critical. And I don't know where you put spirituality and faith in this journey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Christian, and that's a big part of it for us. So we go to church on Sundays, and I've tried to make that a bigger priority. So like volunteer some in our church kids ministry, and trying to make sure that that's, how do I, again, this is a big part of it. I don't have time to necessarily think about food all the time and like let that be my obsession, because I'm trying to just balance work and family and church and like raising my kids to be like really awesome humans. And hopefully that they're really healthy as well, and creating that balance with them. So, that's a big part of it for us. And it's just, I do think that, a big thing in the church is just this amount of gluttony. Sometimes like we, focus on potluck meals, and there's just not a lot of focus within the Christian community on health. And I think that's a really big missed opportunity. And the way that we show love to people so much is around food, and people deal with tragedies and injuries. And, my dad was a pastor, when I was being raised, and, my brother died and when I was 11, and my mom, was very thin. She'd had 3 kids, and we were all like, little older kids. And my mom gained 100 pounds after he died. And like, I think that's where just there's this comfort element of like people trying to show you love and compassion. And we do that through food. And sometimes even now, that's what's harder for other people when I'm not eating certain foods, is because they're trying to show love and care for me. And I'm not able to eat the casserole or be shown love through that food. Like, I'm sure when we go back to visit my grandparents, next weekend, there's like traditional foods that my grandmother has always made and things like that are a little harder sometimes for them to understand why I can't eat those foods. And it's because we show love through food so often.
Yeah, it's a very important point. And I think faith is always the first thing we need to lead with in life. And food is not our entertainment. And that's one of the problems in our world today. And we use it to feel good, and we are sharing it around, and maybe we can do it in other ways. And I think I know my focus as a physician is I want to help people heal. And I always talk about the power of faith as the first thing they need to focus on. And nutrition is critical, but there's a lot of other things that we can utilize in this journey, because we're eating in order to be able to do the things that we love to do to help people.
And I think that's a big part of the emotional struggle is, carnivore gives you physical satiety, but like I also still then had to realize, like, why are you eating when you're not hungry? Like, where is that stress eating coming from? You're really sad and emotional right now. You're grieving. Why are you eating? And like, where does that come from? And so how can you misplace that? And that's a big part of it, is spending some time in prayer or spending some time understanding, like, I have to almost like, I think everybody who has these like severe addictions, and whether it's shopping or drugs or food or, any type of obsession, it's usually because we're misplacing hurt and grief for this thing that's filling this void in us. And I think God has the ability to fill that void for you, but it's even work. Somebody who was raised in the church, it's still like not this. We often think of that with other types of addictions, but we don't think of that with food. Like, there still has to be this void that's filled, this emotional healing that needs to happen outside of just like fixing what you eat.
And I think that the carnivore and keto in many ways, and really keto is a high fat diet. That's it.
Right.
And you simplify it, it's high fat. Paleo is high fat. Carnivore is high fat. And if you focus on fat, you reduce the inflammation, which also suppresses the bacteria and yeast in the bowels, which causes a tremendous amount of inflammation, because you're not supposed to have all those bacteria and yeast in there. And so it's such a game changer. So what other ideas and thoughts have I not asked or mentioned that is really sort of important for you in your quest on this journey to help people heal?
I think I kind of mentioned it, but there is just so many ideas and protocols and carnivore methods and like all of these different things that are out there. And I think that like the more people can just start simple, like just start very simple, and don't worry about your fasting protocol and your exercise protocol and getting light and getting, like, all of these things can be very important. But I am somebody who, in my group, we really focus on having one non-negotiable thing. And for me, that's stay carnivore. I know that I stay carnivore. Now, I also have intermittent fasting goals. I also would like to get some movement in regularly. I also would like to, do several other things. I want to get enough sleep. Like, all of these things are great. But yesterday I had a stressful day and was like feeling anxious and like just feeling a little wound up at night. And I kind of didn't really know why. And I just got a little flustered and I was feeling very overwhelmed, and kind of out of nowhere, I was like, I'm hungry. It was like 7:30 at night. I never eat that late at night, but I just could feel myself getting anxious. I just was feeling a little on edge, and I was going to go and sit on the couch and like try to muscle through it. And I found myself like getting up and walking to the kitchen. I could just tell I was just antsy, and I kept thinking about food. And I knew in that moment that one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to just eat something that's approved and kind of throw out, don't worry about your fasting window. Don't worry about being perfect on your, this means you're going to eat too many calories for the day. Like, I could either let that go and eat some eggs and, scrambled eggs and cheese and feel good and then go back, like, let that be a win. Or I was going to try to push through and I was going to try to muscle through. And the next thing you know, I might be grabbing a slice of cheese and then go sit back down. And then I was going to grab some pepperonis. Then I was going to grab some pork rind. Then the next thing you know, I'm eating half a jar of peanut butter hiding in my pantry. Like, to me, I know this spiral that happens if I push myself to try to be perfect at everything. And so at 7:30 at night last night, I cooked up a bunch of scrambled eggs and I threw some cheese on it and butter. And I just sat and I ate scrambled eggs and cheese and butter. Like, total way too much food for the day. I probably didn't need to eat it. But you know what? I ended the day yesterday with a win. I felt like, you know what? I did it. I won. I woke up this morning feeling like I made it through the day. I didn't let stress or eating or snacking like get the better of me. I just had an extra meal and it was fine. And so my one non-negotiable was stay carnivore. And sometimes I think we try to fix everything. Like, here's my 10 goals that I'm going to do. And I'm going to get my morning light and I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to walk after my meals and my ketones are going to be high and my fasting window is going to be great. And we focus on all these things. And when one tiny thing goes wrong, we just say, forget it. And we throw it all out the window. We go back to eating the way we were eating before. And it's just too hard in a real life to keep up with everything at the same time. And so, you're juggling, I guess this is right. You're trying to juggle all these balls at the same time. But if you just have one, if everything gets crazy and all of a sudden you're going to drop everything, you can either drop everything or you can just hang on to one of them. Like, you absolutely can just grab one and hang on to it. And so for me, that's stay carnivore. And I try to do other things, but if I give up or like if something goes wrong, at least I know that I can come away with the win and not put too much pressure on myself. And so I think people need to kind of find like, what is that one thing? Maybe it's like no alcohol, or maybe it's as simple as like no chocolate because you're constantly going and eating chocolate. Like, whatever is that one thing that you can just focus on, one thing that's going to give you this daily win and help build your motivation, help build your consistency, help you create better habits. And I think that doing that rather than trying to focus on all these different things at the same time and putting too much pressure on yourself.
One non-negotiable.
Yes.
And stick there.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular books that you have inspired you by any way, any chance?
I think for people starting carnivore, I always tell them to go get Judy's book just because it's a great and understanding the elimination diet aspect of it. And then again, if you want to add other foods back in, she does a good job of explaining, how to do that and what that might be. But I think that's a big part of it from like a motivation standpoint. It's really just anything that you can do that's helping you to focus on just one day at a time, I think is important. The Tiny Habits book. I'm trying to think of some other ones off, but things that just kind of help you build better habits over time.
I keep my parents' old Bible, and I always love to read Sarah Young, Jesus Always. It's really great. And we need that inspiration. And I just really, really, really want to thank you for being here today, Laura. And we're going to do this again. And how do people find you? Plus, we've got the connections down in the links all over the place. But can you just mention it for us?
Yeah, if you just Google Laura Carnivore, it kind of pops up everywhere. Or you can look up, Laura Spath on YouTube. And lauraespath.locals.com is where you can come find that community.
Again, Laura, thank you so much. We're looking forward to learning more and sharing that one non-negotiable that we can all lock onto. So again, God bless and thank you everyone for joining today. Really appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. Kilt's Mighty Tribe. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.